Putin vows deeper ties with Vietnam in visit criticized by the U.S. This is from the BBC. The leaders of Vietnam and Russia have said they want to boost ties since the pairs met in the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi. Vietnamese President To Lam was full of praise for his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, congratulating him on his recent re-election. Mr. Putin, in return, said strengthening a strategic partnership with both the Southeast Asian countries, with the Southeast Asia country was one of Russia's priorities. His trip to Vietnam, which comes on the heels of his lavish visit to North Korea, is being interpreted as a demonstration of the diplomatic support Russia still enjoys in the region. So Russia has long had a very tight connection to Vietnam. They supported Vietnam when it was warring with America and France. It also tends to support the educational ambitions of a lot of Vietnamese students. They'll go to Russia and study. Vietnam is also a major military industrial client for Russia. So the relationship between the two is long established and close-knit, even though the U.S. tends to treat Russia like it's an isolated country. Nobody talks to Russia. And this comes at an interesting time. Vietnam is one of the only countries that did not condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And as we know, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a major moment for the West. They really used it as a moment to economically and diplomatically sanction Russia. Again, further pushing this narrative that Russia is an isolated incident. George, you have a foreign policy background. I'm curious what you think of this move in terms of Russia and Vietnam's partnership.
Yeah, so going back to the 2016 Trump campaign, I was the only guy on the campaign who actually gave the interview to a Russian newspaper about sanctions. This was going to 2016. So the U.S., the Obama administration, obviously after Russia moved in on Crimea, decided to impose sanctions. And basically the argument always has been, like since Kissinger, if the U.S. tries to isolate Russia, they're going to do one thing, and that is they're going to go into China's hands. They're going to look east and not west. So this playbook, we've seen it over and over and over. Russia has basically created this fortress economy now where they're basically now immune to Western sanctions. You have the rise of the BRICS, which are basically trying to collapse the U.S. dollar and redesign the world global economic order, the trade order. And this is exactly what Putin's doing. He's like, if Europe doesn't want to buy my gas, if Europe doesn't want to buy my oil, they don't want to buy my weapons, then North Korea wants to, Vietnam wants to, and I'm going to sell it to a discount to China, and China's going to help me out. And all of these countries now are growing as a collective GDP. The U.S. dollar is slowly but maturely collapsing, and sanctions have been an utter failure. So we're probably going to see a lot more of this moving forward.
I don't understand why they're doing the sanctions. If this is the outcome, is that Russia moves away from the market entirely, it feels like a self-destructive move to sanction them. Knowing that, why would they do that? Well, you can answer for them, but what do you think?
Well, here's what's interesting. So the U.S. actually comes out as a winner in this whole strategy, right? Because the U.S., under Trump at least, not with Biden, it was a net exporter of energy, oil and natural gas. It actually became a net exporter of energy for the first time since World War II. So at a time when these sanctions were imposed on Russia and they couldn't sell oil and gas to Europe, the U.S. started exporting to Europe. Then you had the sanctions, and then more weapons from the U.S. were being shipped to Europe. So that really is the situation, that Europe is actually the one that's going to really feel the brunt of this failed policy, while the U.S. really kind of gets better off, and China gets better off, and Russia kind of remains the same. So Russia's really Europe at the end of the day is really idiotic for following the U.S. sanctions policy, while the U.S. kind of wins out, Russia wins out, and China wins out.
And both the leaders of America and like President Biden and the president of China were both recently visiting Vietnam. I mean, I feel like Vietnam is really caught in this eccentric landscape where it is both courted by these major powers, but it also is something the major powers are courting. They need Vietnam to sort of work with them, even though it seems to be trying to stay, what do they call it, bamboo diplomacy, be friends with everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because Vietnam and China have the South China Sea dispute, right? There's a lot of oil and natural gas in the South China Sea. There's a lot of merchant trade going through the South China Sea, the Strait of Malacca, and Vietnam, ideally for the U.S., would have kind of been used as like a hedge against like a growing China, a growing, North Korea. So the U.S. in an ideal world would like to ally with countries like India, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam to kind of contain China. But that's not happening because these countries, they see what's going on with the sanctions with Russia, and they also see the lawfare in America. And you know what they say? You know what? If they could impose sanctions on Russia and freeze their assets in Western countries and try and destroy their economy, because they stood out of line, they could do it to us. So maybe we shouldn't follow the U.S. as much. And also, basically, they want alternatives in case the United States ends up doing what they did to Russia. So that's why China is stepping in and saying, look, we still want to do business. Russia says we still want to do business, but we're not going to try and change how you run your country. And that's what this entire new model that BRICS is trying to impose. And it's really devastating to the United States right now because Biden has not instilled leadership around the world.
So the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi has responded to this. I have this story from Time Magazine. It says the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, in a statement Monday, said no country should give Putin a platform to promote his war of aggression and otherwise allow him to normalize his atrocities. Do you think that the U.S. condemnation of this trip is enough to deter other Asian nations from potentially pursuing a more diplomatic relationship with Russia? Or is the state of affairs in the Indo-Pacific so fraught that anyone could come in and become the major influencer there?
You know, geopolitics really abhors a vacuum, and there's a massive vacuum that's been created now around the world because of this lack of U.S. leadership or, just like failed foreign policy. So when Biden or Blinken or some of these administration folks try to intimidate China or Vietnam or North Korea or, Singapore or some of these other countries, they're not going to put their lot in with the U.S. because they simply don't want to be burdened with what democracy promotion means in Southeast Asia.
Do you get the sense that there's an attempt by the administration to be in any way aggressive? Because it's my sense that, like, granted, Donald Trump was, as people would say, that he was bombastic and stuff, but there wasn't a lot of question from people as to whether or not he would do, whether or not he would strike. He was a loose cannon, they thought, but he was unpredictable enough where it seemed legitimate when he would make a threat. I call to mind Blinken's trip to Alaska, where he met with the Chinese envoy. I forget what his name was. But they made it clear the United States is not in a position that makes China feel like they have to worry about what the United States is going to do. This is directly related to, obviously, to the current administration, because that was not the way that China behaved during the Trump administration. So I don't imagine that the administration really believes any kind of comments that they make like that. Do you? I mean,
no, because the results speak for themselves, and the U.S. has absolutely no strategy when it comes to dealing with countries like China. Biden, with all of the allegations that have been made about shady money coming into the coffers of the Biden family from various countries, many would argue that he's been compromised because of stuff like that his son was dealing with these Chinese energy companies, CFFC. They have the Ukrainian issues. So basically, when these countries that have been giving millions of dollars in shady money to his son and potentially his family say, this guy's not going to do anything because we potentially have something on him. I mean,
not just to put a button on, I'm not in any way, I don't doubt whether or not the Bidens are corrupt or anything like that, but I don't think that the behavior of other countries is because of any kind of leverage that they might have. I really think it's just that they don't respect them and don't think they'll do anything, that is what they communicate.
That tends to be my perspective too, that Biden has positioned himself so weakly, both in terms of the deals that he makes. Yeah. He has a mess. I mean, he's in my opinion, created several wars, and then he also just physically looks weak, right? You never see him enter a meeting where he seems to be the one really commanding the room.
And this is what I think
communicates to everyone that ultimately the U.S. is in a vulnerable position right now.
And that's what I think really is at issue here. It's not as much as I'm like, again, I don't have a whole lot of doubt about whether or not the Bidens are corrupt. They have been in government for 47 years or whatever, and they've made millions of dollars, et cetera. I'm sure that there's plenty of stuff that people can come up and say, oh, this was somehow underhanded and et cetera. But I really don't think that is the thing that actually could touch Americans on a real basis, because the vulnerability and that the weakness that the administration communicates to other countries, that's what can actually touch Americans, right? That's what can make, can really affect people. If the Bidens are corrupt, whatever, like, I'd love to see him in jail, but that's like, it's not going to change, Joe down the street's life. If there's some kind of international conflict or Joe's kid has to go fight in a war, that's going to change Joe's life. And that's what matters, right? I mean, that's my sense.
And that's what the stark and diametrically opposed foreign policy of Biden and Trump is, right? It's about peace through strength and American exceptionalism and revitalizing American industries and uniting America under the banner of red, white, and blue and God, right? And that's what Trump was all about. While with Biden, we've never been more divided. There's an open border, which is wreaking chaos at home. Inflation is rampant. He cut off American energy exports that we just talked about a little earlier, which created this economic crisis that we're living in. So when you're weak domestically, it's kind of hard to project power abroad. And I completely agree with you that our adversaries and our allies are watching this very closely, and and our allies are terrified, and our foes are emboldened because of it.
Thanks for watching this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to check out the live show Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you all there.